welcome to the book presentation, H is for Hemp. I'm really glad I still have an audience because this is pretty late in the day and I can imagine that it was a very exhausting day. So I'm going to try to give you a little bit of light lecture by walking you through with many images. I want to take you along on the journey that it took me for the past 6 years on making this book, H is for Hemp. And fabric for the future was definitely one of the questions that got me into the performance days. And the question that I will try to address in my talk now is, has industrial hemp, has it the strength to actually be used in the mitigation of the climate crisis? And that was one of the questions that made me travel during the entire time of 6 years. I went through 26 countries on 4 continents. And to do that and stay independent, I actually decided to move in my car, which was not made on behalf of researching hemp, but it actually was in 2016 when I decided to look into the refugee crisis in Europe, which then was at its height. And my story just kept being interrupted by this teeny tiny plant. And then eventually, after a couple of months, I decided to actually give it a little bit more of, consideration. And I had an Italian guy, the one who introduced me to the hemp story, tell me hemp can feed, dress, shelter, and heal humanity. And that was kind of the missing link that I had needed at that point when I realized, this is actually everything what will potentially make people leave their home countries, because they either don't have food, or they don't have a secure job, or they don't have a politically secure situation. And that actually got me to decide that instead of focusing on the outcome of the refugee crisis, to actually focus on the potential of hemp and see how this could actually solve some of these problems that we were experiencing. Now, one of the things about hemp that is really unique and why it certainly differs from, let's say, flax or mushrooms or many other plant-based or plants that can be used for many sustainable processes is that hemp has a potential to be used in dual conditions, meaning that if I make food, I can still use the stem to build houses. And that was certainly one of the things that inspired me to really, evaluate how and in which parts can hemp actually address our global socio-ecological crisis. Now, this is something that probably many of you know. I know I'm speaking to a very focused community of people who are very much into sustainability. So you probably have heard of the donut economy by Kate Raworth, which definitely inspired me when I found out about it. And I used it as the ground structure for the book. So basically, I asked myself the question, can hemp in some way address all of the human shortfalls, such as water, food, health, education? You can see them on the bottom. And by doing so, can it automatically also bring back the overshoot, the planetary overshoots? And I will basically now run you through some of these findings that I personally find the most exciting about the hemp story. And I do want to say that afterwards we will be having a little panel discussion with 2 experts, which are definitely in the textile world. And I would encourage anybody to stay on because I'm basically framing the broad picture about hemp and how it can be used. And then afterwards we'll be discussing in detail how hemp is applied in the textile industry, what are the pros, the cons, and how especially can it be used in a carbon sequestering way on the way to carbon neutrality. So let's start with building. Building, to my consideration right now, is one of the most potentials for hemp to actually be used in the carbon sequestration process. Meaning that, when we're using cement swallows up not just a lot of sand, but also a lot of energy to be produced. But also our houses usually are built with a humongous amount of plastics and petrochemical-derived products that after their life cycle ends, they all end in the landfill. And there's really little we can do about recycling them or bringing them back, or, of course, they're not even biodegradable. So this is a real threat. Whilst the hemp used as a building material, sorry, let me back up. What I was just saying about the numbers is, if you look at it, you have 73.2% of the energy in our industries actually it's not the whole that goes into the building industry. This is more of a holistic infographic. But about a quarter of our global energies go into the building industry, and that is just the production. And then we're not even counting in what's being lost energetically when these buildings are not insulated well, and we need to heat them in cold climates or cool them in hot climates. So this is a house built completely of hempcrete it's called, and that's basically you use a stem of the hemp plant and you break it apart. It's called the chips. And the chips mixed with limestone and a binder will actually amount to a material that after construction will uptake 90% of CO2, which is a huge amount of number. And this is even after subtracting all of the CO2 emitted during the tractor hours, during the agricultural process, during transportation from the material onto site. So this is something fairly, I would say, groundbreaking, that we can build carbon negative houses, and something that's definitely not used on a wide scale enough. The next topic I want to address is biocomposites. I mean, everybody knows the plastic debate is not especially new, not here in Europe. Plastic is a blessing and a curse. Of course, it also freed up a lot of things like transportation became lighter, so we're losing less energy on the transportation. But at the same time, our global inability to take care of the plastic waste we're creating, which tentatively all ends up in the oceans, is definitely one of the problems that makes plastic more of a curse than actually a blessing and benefit to humanity. So changing to, I'll say hemp plastics, even though the industry does not like to hear that word because they're called biocomposites, is something that could definitely bring back a recycling process in this material and also much more awareness to the material itself. So right now we have stuff like bottle tops being made from hemp plastic. There's motorcycles made from it. And if you look at the regular plastics, for example, fisher nets, if they end up in the ocean, they will last 500 years. These are time spans that we obviously as human beings can't even really wrap our head around. So to try and find plastic materials that either break down much quicker than what we're used to, or else have so much value that we do want to bring them back to the company that produced them for recycling purposes, is certainly changing the whole plastic world. One of the inventions that's also fairly new, it's been done in Tirol by Valentine Treu. She actually came up with a ski pole made from hemp composites. I show this one because it shows also how we can actually, swap for carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is a material that's extremely light, but it also eats up a lot of energy. Now, if the hemp, the textile strength is incredibly on the hemp. So this is one of the reasons why a lot of the automotive industry, the aero industry is actually turning towards the hemp plastic currently. The next topic is tree-free for tree-free paper. And this is definitely has become a little bit of a personal pet peeve topic for me, because I set out or declared, I think it was in 2018, when I said I will make a book and I will print it on hemp. Little did I know, because after that I started trying to find hemp paper and realized there's no hemp paper around. So I had literally no idea what to do. I got hemp paper samples from India, from China, all over Germany and Europe, but the problem was they all looked really beautiful, but they were handmade, beautiful papers that absolutely were not apt to run through a offset machine or an inkjet printer. So I kind of stood there and was like, that's going to be kind of a journey, because either I walk my talk or I'm not going to print my book, because if I can't do it on hemp, I'm not going to print it at all. Now, that was probably before I knew how much it would take me to make a hemp paper. But 2 years ago, I reached out to the German paper manufacturer, Hahnemühle. Some of you might know them. And asked them very foolishly, I said, you're making hemp paper for inkjet photography prints. Don't you want to make a paper for me for the book? And they looked at me like, books are not our market. We're a fine art paper company. And I said, well, what the heck? Nobody else does it. So give it a thought. And then it took the CEO of Hahnemühle 8 minutes, and he got back and he said, I think we'll give it a try. Well, 2 years later, this is the result. We printed the book on hemp. It was a really long journey, and it was not exactly easy. But it is the first hybrid paper that can be used for offset printing as well as digital printing. And I certainly hope that after this book, it will be finding its way into the market. The price is definitely a problem because it's very high, but the more the demand, hopefully also the price will go down. Talking about paper, it's always this thing, why do we need to go to hemp for paper? Why can't we stay with what we've done for the last 100 years? In fact, most papers prior to 100 years from now was actually made on hemp because the rag collectors, they collected old clothing, they ground it up, and they made what was called, the linen pulp. And there was a lot of percentage of hemp in there. Now, this is actually an infographic on Finland. If you look at it, you can see that within 1 century, Finland literally got deforested. And I'm giving you the example of Finland, but you can put that in for Sweden, you can put that in for Romania, you can put that in for the Amazon forest. This is happening worldwide. And one of the big problems with that is the forests are so vital for biodiversity reasons, which in the long run will also bring down or bring us back within the planetary boundaries with the climate crisis. So it is actually something that we do need to consider on how we can get back onto something that's hemp. It regrows in 3 months. It's an agricultural crop that actually does not deplete the soils. It does not need a whole lot of chemicals to be grown, and therefore would actually generate a much more sustainable paper. As said, this is the book. You can see the logo of Hanemühle. If anybody wants to check out their paper, you will find it on the website. And let's move on. This is probably one of my favorite topics on the whole hemp talk, the phytoremediation. Now, phytoremediation is basically cleaning the soil through plants. That's something that's not just unique to hemp. There's other plants that can do that as well. The only difference between other plants and hemp is that hemp has a pretty broad spectrum of what it can do. Right now, we're looking at an industrial contaminated site from a steel industry in South Africa, which they have been tackling for almost 15 years. And they had a very slow movement with more of the old technologies where it was, put another layer of soil on top and then wait until that's contaminated and then do the same thing again and hope that somehow this thing is going to work out itself. Well, the detrimental effects from our modern industries certainly do not take care of themselves. So we do need to come up with more savvy ideas and probably plans on how to fix that. And this is basically what hemp can do. So it really addresses all of the heavy metals. It can uptake them, and it doesn't end just with the heavy metals. So hemp can actually even clean up nuclear contaminated soils. But beware, when you have a hemp plant cleaning up very detrimentally polluted soils, you surely do not want to use it for a building material, for paper, or for textiles, or anything that would be edible. Of course not. And this is where so far the opinions kind of went a little bit divergent because there weren't any real solutions for this. And I still get a lot of questions when I speak at panels about this from experts where I would think that they would know how to solve these problems. And they're like, Maren, do you know anything like, where's that threshold? Where can you use hemp when it's been grown on contaminated soils? Sometimes it feels a little bit bewildering that I, as a storyteller, am the one to deliver any answer. But I kind of see it as an amplification, that I collected all of these wonderful stories and now I'm just trying to spread them and multiply them through you guys. And I do want to tell you a very hopeful story from South Africa, in specifically the city of Johannesburg, which was founded on the premises of gold deposits. Now, the bad thing, or the good thing, however you want to take that, is that gold always comes in combination with uranium, which was one of the reasons why in South Africa they had the Pelindaba, one of the biggest nuclear programs. This is not active anymore, but what happened is that a teeny tiny group of scientists that started growing hemp in a test trial to see, is there any way we can clean up these lead-up gold mines with hemp? And then they had exactly that problem. They ended up with highly contaminated plants and didn't really know what to do with them, because if you bring them anywhere else, all you're doing is cross-contamination, but you're certainly not fixing the problem. So they partnered up with the former Palindava nuclear program, and they're using their, it's called liquidation process, which basically starts recycling all of these heavy metals in its individual form, and they can go directly from there back into the industries, which means no further mining needed to bring back up all these precious metals that are used on various parts of industries. But also the liquidation process creates energy or makes energy. So, but basically they're tackling 3 of the country's biggest problems. They're cleaning up detrimentally polluted soils, they're solving their energy problem, and they're tackling the food shortage. Because if hemp is grown as an energy plant on polluted sites, it's actually not competing with the food crops that should be grown on that soil that actually delivers food edible for humanity. And talking about food, it's kind of a no-brainer, but I think we kind of, I don't know, either we do not want to talk about it or we just don't want to look into it. But obviously our food grows in soil, which probably at this point we should rather call dirt than soil, because we have about a soccer field per hour that of soil, of good, clean soil that goes to waste due to overly used agriculture, to overly used nitrogen and phosphor, to all these wonderful things that we tend to use on plants. Now the thing is that whatever is in the soil will also be in our food. So if our food becomes something that we can't really use as a base of good nutrients anymore, then the question is really, how do we define health? And I will leave it at this. I think this infographic speaks for itself. If you compare hemp seeds and a steak, these are the numbers. So the steak actually doesn't really look as wonderful anymore after looking at these numbers. Plus, the hemp seeds actually deliver you a full range of the amino acids, and they have the omega-6, 3, and 9. So it's a complete equivalent for meat or any protein source that's actually deriving from animals. And by the way, I lived off hemp protein, I think, for 4 years, so I'm still here. It works. And now on to the last thing that I think is probably most interesting to most of you guys, which is the textile sector. It's when you look into hemp textiles in Europe, you kind of oftentimes get that, no, it's not happening. Textile in generally is not really happening in Europe anymore. And actually, I could, at least in this case, prove wrong, because in Turkey there's a sort of like how would you say it, a light reoccurrence of textile business happening. Most of it surely looks like this, which is hand-worked fields, hand-pulled golden long fibers, which is a tremendous amount of work and really a labor of love with hands. And it takes forever, and it's definitely something that would not apply to our modern industry setting of, more and fast and economically. But it's happening, and I think there's a good chance that this will also progress in the coming months as, our world political situation is really delivering us more than just one cost, why we have to turn more local and see that our supply chains are not too far distributed all over the world. Now, most of the really good hemp fibers at this point really derive from China. And this is all Chinese hemp fiber going from the raw material or the raw fiber being extracted to the different parts of the processes. And it's no wonder. China has now pretty much invested about 40 years of research and also a lot of money into furthering the hemp textiles on a global scale. But most of the textiles produced in China are actually coming into our European markets. So this is a little bit of the production lines in China, which I actually was able to photograph one of the exhibitors here. It's Hemp Vortex. And we traveled over certain parts of the country from harvest to the different parts of post-production of the fiber. And one of the things that was really stunning to me about Hemp Vortex is it's not just about hemp fiber, about the strongest plant fiber in the world and it being an ecological process and everything. But Dinghong Liang, the CEO of the company, is also really applying, I would say, social equity to what he does. He feeds all of his workers an organically produced meal because he has organic gardens in the direct vicinity of the factory. So they get a good meal every day. He puts a lot of emphasis on that because he actually comes from a farming family. But also he gives microcredits to his workers so that they can install solar panels on their roofs and have like a little bit of extra income. I know this doesn't really go along with that slide. I was going to tell that earlier. And here we see some of this large scale, which obviously to the European eye is just wow, because we're already getting really excited if some hemp farmers has one of these machines on their field. All of the machines need to be adapted. Hemp is very, very sturdy, and anything that has a turning technical part, the hemp loves to wrap around, and it can really bring to a full stop like over 200 horsepower machines, and like tractors being lit up by fire or going on fire because they got, the hemp fiber got stuck in them is definitely no new story to anybody who's working in the hemp farming business. Hemp is coming back to Europe. At least I saw that with Saleva, who came out with a climbing pan specifically made from hemp. They also have a rest of a clothesline made with hemp, but the climbing pan was something that to me really synced, because if you're on the rock, you have high abrasion. You need a textile that's really durable, because otherwise your pants rip. And that is actually something that we still mostly say can't be done with anything that's non-synthetic. And in fact, with the hemp pans, they proved it can be done. Of course, it's a combination also with synthetics. And while Saleva is working really, really hard on establishing a circular economy for their hemp products, they're still receiving their textile fibers from China as well at this point. Another one, and this will also bring me to our panel discussion, is Hemp Age. We'll have Robert Hertel, the CEO of Hemp Age, coming up to the stage in a couple of minutes. And Robert and Hemp Age, they're doing beautiful clothing, which is a combination of hemp and organic cotton. And you can just see this differentiation between a really high abrasive garment and then very fine knitted garments. And with this, it's really interesting, since there was a reason why I told you that car story, that I lived 4 years in the car, because when you're living in a car, you obviously do not have access to water. It is a self-sufficient thing that you kind of dress yourself in clothes that will not stink after 5 hours of wearing them. And I pretty much lived in my Hemp Age clothing, and I know it's antiseptic, so you can usually wear it for a couple of weeks before you come to the point where you say, okay, now it's time to look for water. And so in recap to the more general part on hemp, I will say that all of my findings really convinced me after these 6 years that hemp could make a vast difference in our industries. It could probably even encourage us to press the reset button on the modern industries, bring us back. I would not go as far as saying that hemp alone will be able to bring us back to carbon neutrality. I think for that we need much more. We all need to change our mindsets, reduce, recycle, minimize our lifestyles, be much more aware of what we use, how we use it, and especially also how we then discard of things. But I think it's a tiny plant that has a lot of hope to give, and a lot of these stories that I found also connected me on to other stories that tell another piece of the puzzle. So bringing all of this together has really been, I would say, quite a positive experience and gathering of knowledge in a time where people tend to get climate anxiety and be tentatively more negative about what's happening in our world around us. Now, I would like to actually open for questions in case you have any. If you want to hang out and wait for the experts to come on stage and then ask your questions that are more textile specific, please do so. I don't know, are there any questions?
You've got your opportunity now to pick on someone who knows about hemp. Davida.
Thank you for being here. I'm a big fan of hemp and natural stuff like also seaweed or flowers to be used. So, simple question. I've been using also hemp. Is like why hemp is not used more in the textile industry and generally. It has been used like for thousands and thousands of years. I mean for everything, for not only for garment, for dressing. So it got so many properties. I understand that obviously how to say. shifts, cultural shifts takes obviously, change of habits and everything, but it's, and obviously there's interest in the whole apparel industry, but why not hemp? It's just so flexible in my opinion, because it could be combined and then become, let's say technical, or, fashionable as you just showed here. So why is not used more?
Charles, can I answer directly? Okay. I think that is a very complex question, and it's a good one, because I kind of skipped that part because I figured I have only limited amount of time. No, it's a very, very good and important question.
We can blow the schedule. I want an answer
Okay,
rather than the time work.
No, I would actually really like to answer because, I mean, obviously there's a whole hemp history, and I have that chapter in the book as well, and it goes back, basically we've been denying this plant for the past 80 years, which is one of the reasons why we completely lost all of the knowledge. The knowledge of production lines, the knowledge of farming hemp. There's, it's problematic when a plant grows in all geographies. That doesn't mean that you just, yes, it means that everywhere you can just throw the seeds in the soil, but what happens afterwards is quite different. In Finland, the hemp might come up to here, but in Turkey, it's up to 8.5 meters sometimes, so you have to apply different machines, you need to work differently. And that's kind of, I heard myself ask that question earlier about the storytelling. We love to simplify because complex things are just not really our human favorite, matter. But the thing with hemp is you have to treat it individually. You have to look at the location you're growing it in, at the height it will get, at the machinery you need. The best thing would be actually if the farmer makes a decision before they start growing the hemp and really decide, am I doing this for CBD? Am I doing this for fiber? You have to use different kinds. You need to sow it differently. Fiber should be grown very densely, so you really have a thin stem and it grows nicely and straight upwards and not the bushy type that has thousands of branches, because then the fiber is not good. So there's a lot of, you have to treat it individually. You kind of have to let that plant guide you. And we just love to go fast. We love to go on large scale. That's oftentimes one of the problems. Then because of prohibition being in place for almost, now we're going on to 88 years, and there's still a lot of places where it's blatantly illegal. Mongolia is still illegal. Norway is still illegal. I mean, that's just a couple to name, from complete diverse geographies. Some places they grow hemp, it's legal for one purpose, but not legal for the other purpose, but it's the same plant. So this all poses a huge problem, which is also why we can't really meet the supply and demand, because, for example, for the paper, we would have needed so much more hemp, but then we don't have enough farmers growing it, and the farmers don't grow it because they're not close enough to the decortication or post-harvest. Sorry, I'm thinking
processing plant.
Thank you. That one. And, if you have to transport the biomass over 100 kilometers, it's not economically very interesting for the farmer because they're basically losing money. So how are you going to motivate a farmer to plant hemp if there's no post-production industry right around that field? So we really have to... My hope, honestly, is that I can excite all of you so much that you're all going to go out and get all these farmers to plant hemp and deliver them the actual reason to do so, because you're going to use it as fiber, you're going to use it for building materials. Basically, we have to come to that table from two sides. Otherwise, we can't really crack down on that problem.
Are there any other questions to pick on Maren? There is. We have more. This is great because it means the panel doesn't happen too soon.
Hi there. It's sort of a continuation of the previous question. Going back to what you were talking about, having to grow hemp, if you want it to be a fiber, to grow it in a certain way. Does that mean that, so for example, if you grow hemp for CBD extraction, because obviously that will generate a waste product, would that then not be good for making fibers out of, or would you still be able to make fibers just of a slightly lower quality?
I would highly suggest you to stick around, because that dual use is one of the questions that I would like to ask Robert Hattel, because he's one of our experts. Obviously we could just hand the microphone on right now, but I would say let's wait for the panel. But one of the things that's for sure is that, if we do not consider dual use on hemp, there will probably not, this whole potential of the plan will not be able to unfold. It will unfold if we're using the seeds or the flower for CBD and then still do something with the stem or with the roots. And there's a lot that can be done. But the thing is that, oftentimes the farmers don't even know who's the market. And it is quite, if you have two different industries to deliver to and everything has to happen at the same time because you're harvesting today and then tomorrow this has to be spread up, it becomes pretty complicated. It sounds easy, but since these industries are not fully developed, it actually becomes quite like a stretch, especially for a farmer who has completely different problems than, being concerned about where do I bring my flowers, who can make the CBD and who can make the fiber. And so there needs to be a lot more communication between the industry, what they need and how they need it to be grown. So the most successful models so far I've seen in places where an industry based on hemp established and then very clearly gives instructions to the farmers and say, we want you to grow for primarily, let's say, fiber. And then there might be a building industry tagging in saying like, you know what, if you take the fiber, then I'd love to take the chips and use them for building houses. So this is where we need to get to. And then hemp will be very, very efficient, I would say.
Before we blow the schedule, I'm going to take one final question. After this question's been answered, we're only going to have a 3-minute break. So I don't want you all to disappear because it gets a bit more interesting.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks for your presentation. What do you think about agricultural practices connected to growing hemp? Do you think that all hemp is sustainable, or do you think that it should be organically grown, like cotton, for instance?
It's a good question. There's something about hemp that actually, I'm not a farmer, but I can only quote what I've heard from farmers, and I've interviewed a lot of them. Most of them actually reported that if you grow hemp in the traditional way, which sometimes happens that a farmer switches from whatever crop they were growing before and they suddenly start using hemp, but they haven't really read up on it or gotten any exposure to it, and they will use pesticides, herbicides. They will just continue with, putting fertilizers on there as they were used, and then they suddenly say, like, that's a crappy plant, it doesn't even grow. Well, hemp is not very forgiving when you put all these chemicals on it, actually doesn't want to grow anymore, which is most of the hemp is actually grown organically. It's just, it doesn't need the label. And that always leads me to the question, should we, in a supermarket shelf, should we label the organic foods to be organic, or should we just label all the other shit with, this is pure chemistry you're eating? Would probably be more helpful because it would stop us all in what we're doing and also be so much more transparent, because natural agriculture, you use permaculture, you use complementary rotation crops, and hemp can be grown quite for a long time without needing a rotation crop because it puts quite some phosphor back into the soil. It doesn't need much of the chemicals, as said, or actually none at all. It does need some fertilizing, but very, very little in comparison to other plants. So on most parts, unless you have one of these old school farmers that are just in their old mindset and they'll throw everything on there that they used to throw on there before, it'll be basically organic, but without the label.
Maren, I also want to continue that question's answer in the panel next, because you've opened up a bigger thing than you realise. This is a magnificent question. But right at the moment, I want to give Maren a chance to have something to drink, refresh her voice. So can we show our appreciation for Maren? The book H for Hemp is here. You can buy, but I'm not going to let you buy it off her, because in 3 minutes' time, Robert, Pamela, there's a panel starting that Maren's hopefully going to control 3 people. Apparently Charles is part of it as well. So 3 minutes time, we're back on stage.
Thank you.
just to give a slightly more formal introduction, the panels today have caused the most interest because the quality of people is certainly way above what we saw in the United States. Functional Fabric Fair, we have a lot of respect for. We're helping them. But the biggest difference between the two shows, in my opinion, are the quality of the panels. Now, although you've got a university lecturer sat at this end, we have 3 specialists. We have one of the gurus of sustainability, Pamela. If you go back to December's performance days, she gave the fireside chat. If you want to open your mind, you need to play that back. We've got Robert, who is the editor of Hemp, and hopefully you're going to give us the detail that we need to know. And of course, Maren, who we've all just been listening to. So I'm going to pass over to Maren. You're curating us, and we're here just to answer questions.
Excellent. And with the help of the audience, I think we already got a pretty good start at the questions. And I would like to take up your question to Robert. Robert, what do you think is one of the best combinations? Like when you're, let's stick with fiber, since we're at the performance days. If you grow hemp for fiber, what dual condition can you create that would be, can you use the chives for building, or would it be better for composite?
Okay, it's working. Well, it depends what you want to use the fiber for. For the construction materials you saw, you can use any kind of hemp fiber. So no matter if you grew the hemp initially for seeds, CBD, whatever. So for construction, you can use any kind. For some of the biocomposites that you also saw, it's actually better to have a stiffer fiber, which means also a fiber that was grown for seeds. For some other applications, you want to have a more elastic fiber, so a fiber grown for textile would be the best suitable thing. So when you look into textiles, I think what most people here are interested, you cannot use hemp grown for seeds. You can use, though, hemp grown for CBD, because there are 2 important things about what the textile fiber needs from hemp. The most important is that the growing is very dense. You need like at least 100 to 160 plants per square meter. And the other thing is the time of the harvest. If you want a good, flexible textile fiber, you harvest after 90 days in average. And seeds will be ready after 120, 160 days.
Nice. I hope that answered that question a little bit. Robert, you have your own company producing, personally, I love them, hemp-aged textiles. And I wonder, is there anything that you can share, especially with the designers in the crowd, with the listeners? Is there anything that needs to be sort of addressed when you're working with hemp as a fiber? Is there any specific need that this fiber has?
Well, most of the problems on the way are solved when you buy a fabric, right? Fabrics have been, those problems have been solved for you. You have maybe little issues with the stitching. You need some better needles, yeah, that don't break so often. You will definitely have to spend a little more time on the ironing, that's for sure. And otherwise, you just have to be aware there are also several things you cannot do with hemp. So if it comes to ultra lightweight, like we see in the sports wear industry, hemp is heavy, and we cannot make it lighter. And there's this story going around about the hollow hemp fiber. Yes, from a technical point of view, if you got a really, really good microscope, you might want to say, yes, it's hollow. But actually it's not. It's the heaviest natural fiber we got. Yeah, that means it's a very good also shielding you from UV light as well as any other source of radiation. But you can never ever make a super lightweight sports garment out of hemp. That will not happen. You have to be aware of that. Then there's the crinkling, which you know from linen, which of course is not so strong for the short fiber, but like you will not have this flowing kind of fabric. So you just don't even try it. You see the fabrics, and a good designer, I think, knows what they can do with them. And the most difficult part of the work has been done when you order the fabric. The rest of it is quite similar to the usual work.
Okay. I want to come back and kind of give you all a little bit of an insight why we got this panel assembled the way it is. So Pamela as well as Robert actually are two of my expert interviews in the book. And I will say that these 10 expert interviews I have in the book were sort of like a hard to carry forward, because there's a lot of questions that I also started asking while I was working on the chapters, kind of going like, LCA. I wonder, or, you know, about the whole, like, you know, the more people you interview, and when you've met about, 400 people from within the industry, it gets pretty blurry, because everybody tells you on some parts the same, but then on some other parts, the opinions just go completely opposite. So I kind of needed my respected experts, such as these two, to help me debunk a lot of these topics that I was working with. And Pamela and I, we met at one of the sustainability, I would say, what do we call that? The outdoor industry sustainability meetups in Italy. Yeah, it was actually in Ostana, in one of the places where I had come first to research on hemp being used for the building industry, and also to revive a very rural, tiny village. And Pamela really helped me to debunk this whole topic on LCAs, which to me was absolutely a book with 7 locks, because I kept hearing that hemp gets really, really bad LCAs. And I was like, well, I don't really get it. And I actually put in this slide a little bit earlier, which shows I will say very broadly, a watering device that I found in China after the hemp had been harvested. And then I was like, I wonder what they do. Now, this is where Robert helped me out, because he said, well, it's not there for watering the plants because they obviously have been harvested. Okay, I kind of got to that point myself. But the question really was, why is it there? And it was there for water. Well, I say water retting now, but the thing is that, when the temperature between night and day is not creating for enough humidity, then you can't really get to the point of field retting. Field retting is needed, and I will pitch that ball to you in a little bit, but before I would like to pitch you a ball, because you haven't said anything so far, because I haven't asked any question, is where are these sort of magic points where hemp becomes or gets these really sometimes bad ratings in LCAs? I do have to tell a little back-end insider. I think it was at least 7 times that I called Pamela at nighttime, and I was like, Pamela, I need your help. I got an email from, I will not name any names, but from respected outdoor industry companies that were turning to me as a climate impact storyteller and photographer, and by no means any sustainability expert, to ask me why hemp had gotten a really bad rating on the Higg index. And I called Pamela and I said, what is the Higg index? I'm pretty sure we can skip that question here, because you guys are all from that industry and you know very well. But Pamela, can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I'll try. So when we're talking about Higg index here, we're talking to one specific tool amongst the 5 that exist, and that's the Material Sustainability Index, the MSI, which is, in essence, a collated collection of LCA data that go from cradle to gate. And that is important because it's not gate to grave, so the actual product piece is missing, so it really goes to fabric at the best. So that's part 1. Part 2 to know is also it can only rely on data that has been released for the public to digest in some way, shape or form. And that's sort of where Robert and I had a conversation just prior to that, and that is sort of part of where some of the problems sometimes arise. So if you look at both fiber and fabric, the data that you will see is fiber and then the whole post-production of that. And obviously the data gets fed in as it is being researched, as it is being assessed. And every year, every couple of years, those that maintain those databases recalculate the data they have in the database. Now, you can imagine that as good as your algorithm is and your standard is, as you look at the data, if you have data that isn't recent, and some of the data points are older, they're confirmed, they were genuine at the time when they were assessed, they may potentially no longer be accurate now for one reason, as you probably will make the point later on, that in some geographies certain retting methods are no longer in use, but that's the data we have. We don't have alternatives in China or in Romania, where you just made a point. Romania no longer really grows hemp, but we do have data on the time when they were growing hemp. So these data exist, and there's no other alternative that we know, because everyone is sitting on their data a bit like that and says, this is my competitive advantage and I'm not releasing it. You can't update. So those databases are as accurate as the latest data that's being fed into them. And that's a bit the challenge. Sometimes you're not entirely sure which component of the 4, 5, 6, like if a fabric is the newest one, which one is the oldest one, because what you really see, and the process, the method has a standard, is correctly followed, you can do that, but you won't see which of those components is the latest and which is the newest one. What you see is when all that data has been digested the last time. So that could be 2018, 2019, 2022, it could be 2001 potentially. And that's a bit the thing with hemp. And this is sort of our hypothesis right now, as we've been discussing before. Those that are going into the MSI will see that, in particular for China and Romania, there's, water retting, I think we were talking about. That, well, in short, the average data for the hemp, for sort of generic hemp in eutrophication is not great. It's basically due because that data is based on water retting. Now, I'm not a hemp production expert. So I really come more for the brand material evaluation side of it. And having had just a conversation, well, apparently that's no longer a method that's being used these days, and certainly not in a geography like Romania where there's no hemp to start with. But that's the data that exists. So that opens up. You really need to start digging into these things. And I mean, you can be as much of an expert in one area, but it's never sufficient. So there we start to be complementary on either side. And now we need to find ways to figure out, okay, why is that data exactly? Where is the original source of that? And as much as you have the data, it's not saying you can just always take things at face value. You still have to ask, where is the origin of the data? How old is it? Which component is how old? And then you can make an assessment of how good or bad an actual fabric is that you get in your hand. It's a good start for a lot of fabrics, but in particular for fabrics and fibers where the data is scarce, and there are a few of them around. Linen is another one that doesn't have an awful lot. You have more innovative fibers around, like some that are just coming into the market, like those that are into leather, the mycelium, the mushroom leather, or some of the spider silk aspects. You really don't have a lot of data that is commonly available. It's proprietary, it's not usually released. Databases have, if anything, like a small slice of it. And you just need to know that. It's like no tool is foolproof. It gives you an indicator. You need to understand still what is underneath. And sort of that's where the conversation always sort of was going around, where we're helping each other to find out what's happening.
Yes, and I really rely on my experts, especially in the whole book. Now, Robert, may I ask you to debunk what we're seeing back here and how this whole, what is this whole thing about water retting? I think we need to probably elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so water retting has a very, very bad attitude, and I think that's where those numbers come from in the Higg index also. The first time the first fiber comparison that I ever came across was done by Made By. And I was there at the initial presentation in Düsseldorf. I was also invited. I was introducing some other stuff there, and I was like, that's impossible. How do you get to those numbers? And the people who made it were there, and I didn't get an answer. It took me 3 years to get the answer, and the answer was internet research. So they looked up stories on the internet, and made what is not an LCA, how I learned. Yeah, but they made those fiber comparisons. What you see here is, since water redding is also forbidden in China since many years, which I myself find absolute nonsense, by the way. But what they're trying to do here is try to make a different climate, right? Like they would be on the coast. We all know that linen, the biggest linen producers in the world, are Belgium and France, and it's in the coastal regions. Why? It's very simple, because you know exactly what day in September you will have nice dews coming in from the coastal side. So this is the best linen in the world. Everybody knows it. And why? Because they got the perfect climate because of the Gulf Stream, just passing by this coast and always carrying warm water and always delivering this moisture in the autumn when you need it after the harvest. In other parts of the world, that is very, very different and difficult. Like here in China, you got a continental climate, you don't have this dew in the night, so since water redding was forbidden, they try to make dew themselves by spraying. So this is not really watering like you know from other fields. They are spraying to make like a thin dust of water, like you have dew in the morning hours. That is for dew redding. But just to come back to water redding shortly, the bad image about water redding comes from the time when the world has last seen a world war. This is when hemp growing in every part of the world was at its maximum height, because back then also the war industry was depending on hemp heavily. Everything we know today made from synthetical fibers back then was made from hemp, even parachutes and everything. So all the countries involved in wars, they asked their farmers, grow hemp for the war. So, and it needed to be readied. And at that time, in areas where water redding was done for hundreds or even thousands of years without any negative impact, it suddenly all grew out of things. So fish were dying everywhere in all the rivers, when already the food was not good. And this was just due to those huge quantities that were suddenly redded, that were not a problem before, but then. And then we talk about the years after the wars, when not only quantities got down, but you also had like huge industries, especially in Eastern Europe, in Hungary, in Romania. So huge factories. The water would have been a problem there. But I think nobody ever read or heard a story about dead fish in the Danube or elsewhere because of hemp redding. Because back then also the wastewater was strictly controlled after the redding process. And actually the biomass you take out of this water is very good natural fertilizers for the farmers. So it is just a matter of handling, as well as we know it with all the chemical substances. This is a matter of how do I handle my wastewater. And to me, it was one of the worst decisions by the Chinese government that they forbid water redding like 50 years after other countries had done it for totally different reasons, even though in China there was never a pollution of rivers done by that, because those big water redding pools from the big companies, all in northern China, in Inner Mongolia, there was not even a river near. So all the wastewater was sprayed on the fields, like you see here, which and also contained the natural fertilizer again, so there was never any water pollution done. And to me, water redding is still the most ecological way to do it. And we have very good researchers in Switzerland, in Italy. They have shown that in a controlled process, you need very few water, you need no chemicals added, you just need the natural bacteria which are already on the plant. You got very small amounts of wastewater which can be treated very easily to be clean after. And this kind of water redding is something, compared to the dew redding that they try to do here, leaves you absolute independent of weather changes, climate changes. You have every year 100% good harvest, no impact by any weather, and you save a whole lot of energy by otherwise degumming those bast fibers in a facility with 130, 160 degrees, using caustic soda and other chemicals, which also can be taken out of the wastewater process, of course, but with the water redding, you wouldn't need them in the first place at all.
Thank you, Robert. That was a fantastic answer. And I actually want to show this is pretty much how it looks when this water is sprinkled up on the plants during the night, and then it's left, and in the morning it starts drying off with the sun again. And I think there was an I don't know, the old people in Italy have continuously told me it's about 2 weeks of, just the right amount of good and bad weather to have a natural retting process going on the fields. And here we kind of come back to that question, why is none of this happening anymore on large scale today? It's basically because these old people stopped it. They never got a chance to actually pass on that knowledge that they had about retting or field retting the plants. And I have seen farmers who literally over 7 to 10 years have just been, trying to figure out when is the right time to get my fibers off the field, when do I need to take them off sort of under emergency because otherwise the fiber goes bad. Robert, I think I was with you at Hemp Age at one point when you had somebody come by, present you. They were very proud. They had just come up with their first batch of hemp clothing. And Robert looked at it and he said, "Oh, this is really bad stuff. I mean, this fiber is completely over-retted." And it's there's just a lot of knowledge, basic knowledge from that plant that just disappeared.
May I say something?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so if you read something about hemp today on the internet, you will definitely come across winter hemp, German winter hemp, European winter hemp. Actually, not a bad idea. You just leave the stalks on the field for the winter. They stand there, so they don't have direct contact with the ground, which makes it better for not have the mold eating them up. I mean, we have a natural fiber. Of course, it's biodegradable, of course. Yeah, so there were some initial testings because, again, if you have the special right climate, it might be a good idea. And there were some tests in Germany done, and the results were quite promising. But one have to understand the year from which those results came from was the driest winter in Germany for 45 years. Yeah, and I cannot go out there and tell a German farmer, it's a good idea you grow hemp now and you make winter hemp. Because maybe in 45 years we will have a good harvest. So much to winter hemp.
Pamela, in your interview, you ended your interview with actually a call for action, and I think this is exactly the place where we need to place that. Do you remember your call of action?
No. Honestly, not anymore.
I was trying to test Pamela if she's already read the book in her own interview.
I
she hasn't.
openly admitted I didn't. Yet.
Well, Pamela was suggesting that, or let me rephrase that question. What do you think is the next step up for the industry, for the hemp industry, to kind of join forces with the modern textile industry? How can we bring that plant back in the game? How can we use it for all its many features? I don't just want to degrade it to just carbon neutrality is the wrong word anyway, but to carbon sequestration.
Well, I think you made a couple of points earlier in your presentation as well. So one thing is data, because a lot of the decisions we take on a gut feeling aren't necessarily correct or not in isolation correct. So data helps us to get a more complete view on that. Data alone doesn't say anything. You still have to make a context of it, and I made that point before. And then the other point is, I think you really made a good point, this kind of round tables where the different players come together and actually have that conversation with what they need and what they can deliver on the one hand. So as a brand, you can create pull, but you also have a specific need in terms of quality of fiber, when the fiber has to be there, on certain expectations. And the same thing on the farmer, on those that do the post-production in between. And I think these kind of conversations are essential because, and this is not just in hemp, right? It's fundamental to a lot of what needs to happen when we talk sustainability and impact and making a difference. You need to understand what your peer needs, what is in the game for them, where their risks are, but also what they can give you. And it's only when you can start to bring that around that you can start to put the different puzzle pieces into place. And hemp is a really good example. I mean, you have the farmers on the one hand, and again, as you made the case, different farmers, different geographies, have different needs, have different deliverables, and have different climates, and that has impact. And similar with a brand, you know, a sports brand has a different set of collections and different timelines than a fashion brand had, than a couture brand has. It's like all of them have different needs. If you go into production, it's the same story. You made the point of before with the needles. Again, it's like this is kind of you need to know that as a manufacturer, but you may not be prepared because you know cotton as a default. And by bringing these things together, one, you build business relationship, two, you build technical knowledge, three, you build trust between the different players, and four, and this is probably even more important, you actually start to put the different puzzle pieces together that in the end, and to a much earlier conversation of today, will allow each and every one to talk to your end consumer and to simplify it, excuse my French, dumb it down to a point where it is understandable but still sufficiently accurate not to be either greenwashing or just false claims. But for that to be possible, you actually need to come together and really understand how the whole systemic of the whole thing works.
Thank you, Pamela. I want to show two more slides, and this really is sort of the story behind the story, because a lot of these times when we were debating topics like, is there herbicides and pesticides used? I had people tell me, not Robert. Robert told me from the beginning on. He set me up with Hemp Vortex and said, you know what? You're full of myth. Can you just please go to China and debunk that story in your own head and tell that story? And I did. And I was given the chance to go there and see all of the production line, which was incredibly helpful because I kept being asked, and maybe that wasn't so much questions, but more the exclamations that people made, oh, in China they do everything with herbicides and pesticides. Well, this image right here should be more than proof that this is not done with herbicides and pesticides, because actually when we were in the hemp harvest, or when we were in the fields during the hemp harvest, it wasn't just the plants that were covered in these bugs. It was all of us. We had several film teams along. Patagonia was actually filming for their all hemp work. What was it? The workwear clothesline. And so we had a bunch of people, and we were just covered from top to toe in these bugs that were, we had the terpenes on us because we were running through the hemp fields the whole day. So the bugs were sticking to us just as much as they stick to the plants. And if you can see, since fiber doesn't really matter if the leaf, the biomass, is intact or not, because this is not grown for CBD or for seeds or anything, they don't really care. They don't care. Basically, I kind of interpret it that way, that the more the bugs feed, the less they have to remove the biomass afterwards. I mean, that's maybe a bit foolish, but this was another picture for the proof of it, because we had these black swallows that basically just came in huge swarms and flew into these freshly harvested lanes of the hemp and literally fed off all these fresh bugs that they could get. Now, no swallow will feed off anything where chemicals are involved, because at least not in these huge flocks. So we basically created a roadmap of images guiding us through debunking a lot of these either claims or questions that people had on how sustainable is it, how non-sustainable is it. And I know we've talked about, I think, this shot quite often, because we were trying to debunk these, bad LCA ratings, and we were wondering maybe they are using herbicides and pesticides. And I remember saying to you, Pamela, I don't think so, because if these animals are feeding off these fields, how could they be full of chemicals? So
you need to go to other geographies and you would see it does happen.
It's absolutely, and I mean, in the 26 countries, I have also seen geographies where things were handled differently, but most of the time, I mean, the couple and few farmers that I found that actually were still sort of like using, I don't think I've ever met anybody using herbicides and pesticides unless it was for a serious accident. But some were still using more fertilization on their fields just because they were in really bad areas with already quite depleted soil. But most of them actually made a point forward and said that plant just doesn't grow very well when you put anything on it.
And I think you make a really good point there, and it goes back to an earlier thing we said, is like fundamentally you really have to understand where you get your supply from, and that if it's hemp, but the same basically applies if it's cotton, if it's linen, if it's wool. I mean, if we were to talk wool from New Zealand is not the same as from Australia, it's not the same as from South Africa, it's not the same from Patagonia, it's not the same from England, it's not the same out of Germany, and so on, so on, and so on. As each of them have got their different problems. And I think this is really the point, is like if you take this journey genuinely and really want to understand or need to understand, you need to dig. You need to prepare to dig. And as a brand, that often means you just have to reduce the type of materials you use, the type of suppliers you use. You have to start to really reduce, as to take the slogan of a drink, reduce to the max. Because that's what it is all about. So only then you can focus and figure out and be reasonably certain that what you do is making an impact, and that's what you can talk about.
Thank you, Pamela. I am in a tricky situation because I'm surrounded by experts, and I mean all three. So if there is anything I have forgotten to ask, then I would like for you to step up now and probably deliver an answer or pose your own question and deliver on that.
Maren, can I make two observations that I think we need to go into more detail?
Please.
For those of you who are not up to date on hemp, Maren's book presentation contained a lot of information, but she hasn't really gone into the point of view from the textile industry. And two things clearly stand out to me. One is the Chinese military use this as their base fabric. So I now look at the financial question. If they can afford to use it in China, why can't we afford to use it for the rest of the world? So that's the first question, as in the economics of it. If some people can make it work because of its durability, why can't we as an apparel industry? The second point I want to bring up is more about the natural properties. You gave out a magnificent line about you can plant hemp on nuclear contaminated land to clean the land. And we're an industry who does an awful lot of what we call biomimicry, where we're trying to impersonate what natural crops do. But the bigger question that needs to be asked, why should we be trying to fine-tune synthetics to copy nature when nature actually has a much better solution? Now, I'm going to start Pamela on this, because when we get onto something like wool, and you just go, wow, everything that wool does, and wool, once again, it's got a really bad rating on the Higg index. There's so many things that come into the question. So the 2 points, one to Robert, which is, I can't work out why, if the Chinese can afford to use it as a base material, why can't the rest of the world? And the second one to Pamela, do we actually need to re-examine the natural properties that we can get, which we're not used to as an industry, because those natural qualities actually exceed what we're currently doing in the performance industry?
Well, first of all, they wanted to use it as a basic fabric. They don't. It was a big plan for the army, big development plan, and all of the 6 main players in China that do uniforms for all kind of armed forces and everything, up to firefighters, got involved in their own research projects. Each and every one of those put $100 million+ into hemp with some crazy things, you know. But however crazy it is, the Chinese also built the Chinese wall. So whether it was crazy or not. So actually, they said, we want to make the same uniforms, we want to use the same machines, and our machines now run on number metric 60 yarns, whether they're polyester or cotton. There has never been a number metric 60 in this world from hemp, but they tried, and actually they did it. So if there's one great thing that ever came out of this military project, it's the number metric 60 yarn made from 100% hemp. Any textile professor that I show it to said that that's impossible. There's a mathematical limit to the spinning of hemp, and it's number metric 38. No, but it's working. Without chemicals and anything. It's just a few tricks. But the thing is, when the military, so when the whole project was finished and the military saw the cost, they decided they rather buy some new rockets for that, and that's what they did. So, and the Americans were very disappointed, I can tell you about that. But the thing is, they do have hemp today in their underwear. It's a hemp polyester blend. They do have hemp in their socks. It's very important for the climate control. and last not least, they have it everywhere where it comes to biological warfare, where you have those kind of ponchos when you put on your gas mask. So it's not only the gas mask filters, but also the inside of those ponchos that protect you from ABC weapons, as they are called. They use hemp because there it's very, very valuable, and it doesn't matter the costs. But in the overall uniforms, it was a plan that they followed, but it didn't work out economically.
And Pamela, can I stimulate you on this question about why are we trying biomimicry when nature could or does have the better solutions?
Well, the thing here is, does nature really, right? And it's not a yes or no question. There's a lot of gray in this area. And just to go back on what he just said about underwear and socks, all of them, certainly the underwear, would have been a polyester mix usually. And the reason for that is durability, because you wear it a lot. And I think this makes exactly the point, right? It's like there are moments where you have to think of what can a fiber deliver and what can't I, and how much of that can we actually prove in practice and at scaled out version. And I think this is a lot where the conversation in the sporting goods industry and outdoor really is yes, wool and so on, they may have a certain anti-static and anti-odor characteristics. Now, if you put that into an environment where there's loads of sports happening, like extreme conditions on occasions and extreme efforts as well, it's like, does it still uphold? And it's not always, I'm not saying it doesn't, I'm not saying it does. It's like, it's just, it raises the question. You actually have to figure out which of the two works better. Some things do work really well if it's just in everyday applications, and that's the big conversation to have. What if what we actually wear is over-spec'd? Because I don't need to wear Mount Everest gear. Frankly, I've not managed my way to Mount Everest in the past. The highest I got was to 4,000 in the Swiss Alps, and it was an easy one. The Matterhorn is out of reach for my skill. That says it all. Do I need that equipment? Probably not. But a lot of the stuff that I'm able to buy these days is nearly spec to that degree. Now, for me, a lot of easier things would do, and that's precisely where those conversations start. Like, a lot of those things would do plentiful for someone like me and the kind of sports and activities that I do. And yes, I do climb, and yes, I do alpinism, but I'm not competitive at the high end. And I think this is where the thing is, there's like some of the natural attributes that fiber do bring, and you know, there are other fibers, kapok being one of them, cotton being another one of them, and then the rarer fibers that are hardly used at all, be it nettles of different types, or if you go to Japan, they've got very old type of linens that are hardly used at all these days anymore. They do have certain characteristics, so there could be totally a value specifically looking at that, but first of all, we just need to debunk our own brains of what performance actually means, and that performance is always tied to a very specific area of application. I think this is where the conversation really takes place.
Now, I asked two questions. so that the audience could be stimulated into start asking questions for themselves. So we're waiting for hands to go up. If you want to join the conversation, indicate and I'll bring the microphone over to you. But if I hand back to Maren.
Sure. Pamela, you definitely got me inspired because I'm trying to think, where and how is my habit of what I wear and when. And I will definitely say, actually, it's a perfect thing to explain why I'm sitting on a stage with a somewhat hole in my pants. I had a pretty bad accident somewhere in Italy where a whole rock flipped on me. I ended up with a serious concussion. That rock could have literally cut into my leg down to the bone, but all that's left is this little tiny hole here. And it basically protected me, and which is putting a lot of proof to the things that both of you have said. It's a very, very durable fiber. I've been living in these pants for, I think, up to 5 years now. I wear them excessively, but yes, I also like to wear my more elastic outdoor pants when I'm doing the mountain climbing and everything, because that's when the hemp kind of starts getting a little rough. There's no stretch, there's no flex.
I mean, and to the point, does anyone climb in here? Well, try fall into an old hemp rope. That is a lot of fun.
Yeah, let's not do that. Let's just try saving our planet with other means. Well, I think if there are no questions, Charles, what do you think?
I want to stimulate a new question. We're going to come to that one, but can I just have in the back of the panel's mind, one of the traits we've seen over the last 2 years is around regenerative agriculture, which is the step up from organic, where we're looking at the amount of carbon that is sequestered into the soil. What I want to know is on hemp, has anyone investigated that? Because to me, I think there are massive wins to be made because you're growing something in natural conditions, you're growing something fast growing. And I know the more you have above the surface, the deeper the roots are. And the roots are where the sequestration happens. So I'm going to go and get the question, but can you guys think of, has anyone looked at the application of regenerative agriculture?
Actually, yes, there has been. There's a young startup. They're based in Hamburg. They're called Hemp Connect. And they actually started, I think it's like a year and a half ago, they started their work. Of course, a lot went into, building up the funding so they can do their research. But they are literally the first that are known to me within Europe that are looking into how much does hemp actually sequester, how much carbon is sequestered during growth, how much is stored back in the soil through the roots, which is quite a lot, but then again, that also depends. I've seen, specifically in Turkey, I saw that where there was a very dry climate and we had sort of like an earth wall that was cut off, where the hemp roots really went down for almost 1.80 meters. So it was quite a deep going root, and but that really differs. If the hemp is growing on soft soil that's well moisted, then it doesn't have any reason to be going down with its root system as far as it does in the dry areas. So obviously carbon sequestration in the soil will differ depending on how deep the root system goes, will differ on what kind of soil it's been grown in. But what they're trying to establish with Hemp Connect is really to kind of put transparency to the product line, which is not confined to textiles or food or whatever you can make from hemp. It's basically any hemp grown. They're trying to provide a very transparent way from, how do you say, cradle to. In that case, it would be, well, I guess grave. Let's call it gate because yeah. Let's say gate at that point, because when we're building a house that's going to be standing for longer, so we're not really at that point yet where we can assess the grave stadium.
And just very shortly on that, it's actually super important work, because as it turns out, you will hear a lot of claims around wool, for example, and its regenerative habits. When you track back where that comes from, it goes back to the 80s to a paper which by now was totally debunked. Which means that work, despite being cited times and over again, actually has to still properly be done. And people like Hemp Connect, it's like they're invaluable because they do, right now, as we need the data, they do the proper science on site. So just to make the point.
I will say that since we, I think, have a bit more of an international audience also, there is a hemp drawdown group in the United States that I just connected to this past weeks when I was traveling and presenting my book in the United States. They're also at that point right now where they're probably going to break through and do similar work for the United States. So if anybody has questions there, I'd be happy to give connections afterwards.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel and the presentation. I just would love if you could paint a more maybe practical or concrete picture, maybe through an example of applying hemp in the textile and fashion industry. So, for example, if we were going to replace a pair of denim jeans and try to make that out of hemp, could you kind of describe the technical adjustments we might have to make from a, I don't know, design or cut and sew perspective, manufacturing? And then from the economic perspective, can we expect that to be, you know, a higher end or actually cost less? And then finally, from a sustainability perspective, what kind of claims can we be making and standing by in terms of the impacts that we're making by switching to hemp? So kind of practical examples from 3 different perspectives.
Looking at Robert here. Robert, what do you say? That's your question, right?
No adjustments needed, just a bigger wallet. So, so the price for the comparable hemp denim is about 5 times higher if you have like 55% hemp in the blend compared to usual organic cotton fabric. Of course, there's a wide range also within denim fabrics, but well, after that, not much more adjustments. Like I said, you have a little bit higher needle use. When it comes to the hemp denim compared to a classic denim is much better for abrasive tests and everything. The only problem you have to face with fabrics that have a content of 55 and higher, this is why you find so many 30% or even lower hemp on the market, is actually the seam stress. You cannot take such a high seam stress as compared to 100% cotton because hemp fiber is more slippery, that the surface is more slippery. This is why on our jeans, for example, you will always find 2 full seams and not a normal seam on the outside. This is when it comes to denim, the only necessary adjustment. Otherwise, washing everything is the same.
I think I'll add, or try to add a little bit on the sustainability. I mean, one of the things, and I guess that's a no-brainer, but it's really also long-lasting. I mean, these are pants that most likely you could probably pass on to your children. Questionable if they will be very happy about that, but if that works for a PR campaign, then that would definitely be one to put on there. It's long-lasting. I think, you know, the apps, like that's one of the things that goes across the band, the absence of herbicides and pesticides in the growing of hemp. Of course, you know, sustainability aspects as far as carbon sequestration, then again, kind of depends on what are you doing with it afterwards. You know, any product that will be reintegrated into the cycle of, you know, I'm not talking with sustainability language here, excuse me. You know, if you wear your pants for 2 months and then recycle them, despite the fact that they could still be worn for another 200 years, then of course it's not going to be very sustainable. But if you're, for example, building a whole hemp house from the remaining chives, then that will offset about minus 90% or, you know, offset 90% of the CO2. And then you could use that, but that always depends on the very individual usage and what's being put together.
On the sustainability, I mean, if you go out and just say it's organic cotton, you can say it's organic cotton, but it doesn't necessarily mean very much either, because you need to know where it's coming from, what staple length it is, what quality production or not you have, what factory it's been, your garment's been made in, what the specs were, and so on and so forth. So if you think about any other fiber, any other product that you have, and how you assess whether or not you can do a green claim, and by now with legislation, there are very stringent requirements around that you need to be able to quantify that either. Quantify that, or you have a certification, a third-party certification that allows you, in particular in the US, but increasingly soon to be so also in Europe, you have to have, the green claims backed up. And the green claims backed up means either you have the data, or the data is publicly accessible. Hence, we're back to, you need to understand what is behind the data, and then talking to the durability and the longevity of it, it's, you either design for stuff to wear. That's the durability piece, and the longevity piece is, do they actually wear it that long? So just because I buy H&M, I've got H&M jumpers that are 25 years old. They were a good value for money when I was a student, and they've had a huge long life, and they're doing really well. So that's been, very sustainable, even though it was cheap fashion at the time. If you buy a pair of jeans and throw it out next week, it's not doing so well. So there are a number of variables, and like with all things communication, you need to be very clear of what it is you want to tell and you can tell, and what the data behind is. If you know you're 20% cheaper, you also need to prove that you're 20% cheaper on the price, and it's no different for sustainability.
And on the back of what Pamela's just said, I hope we're all aware the EU produced their Green Deal on textiles about a month ago that looks into eco-design, looks into due diligence, and looks into green claims. Now, you've got the opportunity now to make yourself familiar with the incoming legislation, or when it does take place and you will be forced to comply. Take a subtle hint, read it, get it up to date. But I'm going to have...
And since we're at that, the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that will require every medium-sized brand, by and large, to report into an electronic database, electronically tagged, and so on and so forth. So legislation is fun.
But I'm going to have to bring the panel to a close, because I know that we're going to lose someone in a couple of minutes. Can I ask you all to show your appreciation for the three people up behind Hemp? Now is your opportunity. Maren has a pile of books. Nab her, negotiate with her, and you can wander away with as much knowledge as she's been able to put down on paper. Yep. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. Now I'm going to be sticking around here by the side of the stage. If anybody is interested in a book, I have a couple here. Otherwise, you can also go to my website and order it online. Then it will be plus shipping and handling. But it is a limited edition, so I will say that eventually the books will run out, and we'll see how we can reproduce them if it's going to be another one on hemp paper. Thank you very much, everybody.
This brings to close what's happening on the stage today, but there's a really good reason why you shouldn't be leaving the show. In 30 minutes' time, Christian is going to open lots of beer down at the cafe area. So continue your conversations. Literally 30 minutes, we're on the countdown to beer. And if you want to say thank you to Christian, he's here for it.
Es gibt ja momentan keine Stoffe aus Bambusfaser. Es gibt es ist alles Bambus, darf man natürlich nicht verwechseln. Man kann auch aus Hanf Viskose machen, aber das, was Sie aus Bambus kaufen können, das ist alles Viskose, keine Faser. Es gab eine Firma in China, die waren aber auch wirtschaftlich